Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to CCI Heronia's Intro to Condo course. If this is your first time that you've joined us online for one of our many courses or webinars, we're so happy that you've been able to take the time out today and come check us out. If this is not your first time and you've been with us before, thank you for coming back and spending your evening with us. I'm Sonja Hodis. I'm one of the many directors at CCI Heronia and a condo lawyer, as well as your moderator today. And today's webinar will be covering condominium basics. And we have a variety of people from the CCI Heronia Board of Directors with us today presenting our Intro to Condos course. This is a course that we hold every year to introduce owners, tenants, directors, potential owners to condominium life and what condominiums are all about. So the goal of today's webinar is to give you a very good foundation that's going to help you understand what condominiums are all about. So if you're a condo director, this course is an excellent introduction to our 2-day intensive director's course, which we are going to be holding this year on April 13th and 14th. And details about the director's course can be found on our website at cciheronia.com. But this is a great course to give you that foundation for that director's course. Before we go any further, I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors. We have a great group of sponsors who are very supportive of CCI Heronia and the webinars that we put on. So thank you to Elia Associates, Condominium Lawyers, Nordic Windows and Doors, Aegis, who is formerly known as Macintosh Perry, Integrity Property Management, and Select Insurance. So thank you again to all of our sponsors. If you want any more information about our sponsors, there's 2 ways on our website that you can get that information. One, if you go to our landing page at cciheronia.com, you will see their logos at the bottom of the page. You can click on their logos. That'll take you directly to their website, or you can go to today's event and click on the logos on the event page, and that once again will take you to their website. So if you want to get any more information or contact any of our sponsors, that's how you can find out where you can contact them and some more information about the company, their products and services. So before we get started with the webinar, I wanted to introduce you to Jeff Struewing, who is our CCI Heronia president. And Jeff has a few words to share with you. Jeff?
Great. Thanks, Sonia. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for Intro to Condominiums course. We are very happy to have so many of you joining us tonight. I believe we have over 100 registered, which is fantastic. I also want to thank Sonia and the Education and Events Committee for all the hard work they do to organize these events and our popular webinars, as well as a thank you to our speakers this evening. And lastly, as Sonia alluded to, a big thank you to our sponsors. Their generosity allows us to provide events like this at little or no cost to our members. If your condominium is not already a member, please have a look at the benefits of being a member on our website, cciheronia.com, as Sonia mentioned earlier. And if you are a member and you like what you see, we thank you for being here and would encourage you to maybe suggest to any other condominium board members you know that they consider membership with CCI as well. We have chapters all across the country. We'd be very happy to have you as a member of CCI Heronia. And you can do that right on the website. Sign up there, pay there, and move on. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way and send a check in as well. Members enjoy access to the Resource Center on our website, our newsletters, discounts on events, educational courses and seminars. Also have access to all our past webinars and past newsletters, as well as the National Resource Center. We're always working behind the scenes to develop meaningful and timely webinars for our members. If you have any topics that you'd like to see us cover in the future, send us an email at admin@cciheronia.com. And lastly, please follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. With that, I'll give it back to you, Sonia. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And this is just a reminder to everyone that today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting this webinar on our website in the next 7 to 10 days, and it will also be posted on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. And we are really trying to get our subscribers up to that 1,000 mark. So if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so, but also please like and share those videos to help us grow the channel so that we can get the information across to as many people as possible. In terms of tonight's webinar, we are going to break the session up into 2 sessions. Halfway through, we will have a question and answer period. So if you have any questions for any of the speakers on what they're talking about, just put it in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Just type your question in there, and we will go through those questions at our break, halfway break. And then we're also going to have another question period at the end of the second session, just before we wrap things up. So just continue to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try and get to them, as many of them as we can tonight. Also, just a reminder to everyone that the information that you're hearing today is general information, and it may not apply to your specific fact situation. So if you are a condo director, it's important to understand that the protections that are given to you under Section 37 of the Act, the Condominium Act, may not apply based on the information we're providing to you. You will need to get an opinion about your specific fact situation from your own professionals. As well, if you are watching this webinar at a later date, you're watching the recording, just be aware that this webinar was recorded on January 24th, 2024. So all the information is current as of that date, but things do change, and the information provided today may not be relevant at a future date. So just be sure to check with your professionals to make sure that the information in this webinar is still current at a future date, if you're watching this down the road. So if you want to get any information about our speakers tonight, they are all members of the CCI Huronia Board of Directors, and you can find out information about our speakers on our website, ccihuronia.com. And you can do that by one of 2 ways. You can either go to our trade directory, we're all listed there, or you can go in the About CCI tab and just scroll down to the Board of Directors link, and you'll see all of our Board of Directors there. All right, so let's get started with tonight's webinar. And we're going to start with Ashley Winberg, who is a condominium lawyer with Pulverung Condos. And Ashley, you're going to start us off discussing what is a condo. And I'm just going to start sharing the screen so we can put the PowerPoint up and people can follow along.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. So what is a condominium? A condominium is a member of a way of communal ownership over property. Condominiums can be residential, commercial, industrial, or mixed. Condominiums are generally divided into units and common elements, with the exception of common element condominiums, which I'll discuss in a little bit. So the components of a condominium, there are a couple, as you can see on the PowerPoint presentation. The first is the units. So the unit boundaries are described in Schedule C of a condominium's declaration, and the boundaries are also outlined in the condominium's declaration, which is registered on title and sometimes referred to as the plan. It's the drawings there that you see on the screen. So units of a condominium can be residential units, parking units, storage locker units, commercial or retail units, telecommunication units. There's a variety of different types. And then there also are common elements of a condominium. So the common elements are generally everything that are not a unit. So everything that lies outside of the boundaries of the units. There are also exclusive use common elements within that, and exclusive use common elements are typically for the use of only one or more specific units. So generally, exclusive use common elements are in the form of a parking space or a storage locker, a garage, patio, deck, terrace, front or rear yard. Another thing that's often forgotten is a condominium. It's a corporation. It has assets. These assets are often in the form of cash, investments, as well as some condominium corporations own units. They can be residential units, they could be potentially a super unit, a parking unit, all different types of units. And corporations also, some of their assets are comprised of shared facilities, which are assets or amenities that are shared often with another condominium corporation or an adjacent property owner. And shared facilities often consist of recreation centers, driveways, roadways, visitor parking, those type of amenities. Now, the next topic that I'm going to discuss are the types of condos that there are. And there are four types. So, and if you could just go the next slide, or that's fine. We'll stay there. So there are four types. The standard, there's a standard condo, which generally is a gray standard condominium corporation 123 or Simcoe condominium corporation 123. A standard condominium is comprised of units and common elements. Now, there's also phase condominiums. So a phase condominium is actually a standard condominium, but it is a condominium that is essentially built in phases. So over the period of 10 years, the developer is able to amend the condominium's declaration and description to add more units or common elements. And then with each subsequent phase, the declaration and description are amended to incorporate the additions. So once all the phases are complete, the condominium operates as a whole, or as they're registered, it operates as a whole. And it essentially can avoid some of the complexities around, sharing shared facilities between two separate corporations when it's all combined into one. Common element condominiums are unique. Often their names will be Gray Common Element Condominium Corporation 445 or Simcoe Common Element 123. Common element condominium corporations do not have units. Instead of units, there are poddles, which are parcels of tied land, which generally have houses on them. The poddles are freehold, so the corporation is not responsible for anything that is situated on the poddle. In that diagram on your screen, the poddle here would be the small black squares, everything located within the thick white line. Those are the poddles. They are freehold, and the condominium does not have any responsibility with respect to anything on the poddles. What a common element condominium owns are the common elements and the amenities and facilities and services that make up the common elements. So in this particular diagram, you'll see there's a common roadway and a park. So the common roadway in this particular example would form part of the common elements as well as the park of the common element condominium. And in exchange for using those amenities, the owners of the tied parcels of land would have an obligation to contribute costs towards the common element condo. Sometimes the common element condos consist of golf courses or ski hills or recreation centers, but most of the time it's roadways, sewage, and sometimes rec centers or a gym facility. The next type of condominium, so the third, is a vacant land condominium. So this would be Gray Vacant Land Condominium 444. And vacant land condominiums, when they are registered, so at the time of the registration of the declaration and description, there are no buildings and structures constructed on the units. So here, the units are those squares, the squares that are in orange, but there's nothing actually constructed yet. So this allows either, the developer can permit the purchaser or another builder to build the structure when the unit is sold. Vacant land condominiums can be like standard condominiums, also phase condominiums. That's a part of a standard, but they cannot be leasehold and they cannot be common element condominiums. Sometimes declarations for vacant land condominiums contain some restrictions with respect to what can be constructed. And the last type of condominium is a leasehold condominium. They're relatively rare, at least I haven't come across any in the Huronia area myself. And the leasehold condominium is developed on land that is not owned by the condo. It's land that is leased from the landowner pursuant to a long-term lease. Generally, the landowner will be a government body or potentially a church or a university or hospital that is in some way restricted from selling the land. So the leasehold condominium leases the land pursuant to a long-term lease, which is then automatically renewed every 10 years unless the owner provides notice of termination 5 years before the end of the initial lease term. That's it for me, and I'll turn it over to Patricia.
Thanks very much, Ashley. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for being with us. I'm going to be talking about the board of directors. Sonja, can we have the next slide? Thank you. As you may know, the Condominium Act is a piece of legislation that creates these concepts of condominiums. It's consumer protection legislation, and it's also based on a democratic model. So unit owners who own interest in units elect a board of directors. The job of the board of directors is to control, manage, and administer the corporation. So there are certain sections in the Act that are attributable to these roles, like Section 17 sets out that the objects of the corporation are to manage the property and assets on behalf of the owners. But it's important to remember that the condo corporation is a different entity. It's not the unit owners, even though the unit owners are the taxpayers, the stakeholders, the people behind the corporate entity. Sections 27 to 41 of the Act set out the standards of operation for the directors and officers. So what we do as part of our roles as condo directors, we have to be familiar with the operations of the corporation. We have to take steps to ensure owners and occupiers comply with the documents. Now, Sonja is going to tell you a little bit more about all the documents, but they basically are the Act, the declaration, the bylaws, the rules, and even sometimes the policies, depending on how they integrate into the other documents. So the board of directors has to know the scope of its authority and also has to be proactive in executing its duties. Another really important component is decision making. So decisions, and if we could have the next bullet, are not always subject to owner approval, only in certain circumstances that are outlined in the Condominium Act. And why that's important is, I'll give you a typical example, is that I have a client who has to replace windows, and it's going to cost them an extra $9 million that they don't really have right now. And so what some unit owners thought is that we have to approve the installation of windows. And what the Condominium Act does is helps board of directors understand their scope and their role by saying you're in charge of capital asset replacement. So if these capital assets are common elements, they're really under the purview and decision making of the board of directors, unless there are certain circumstances that give rise to a vote of unit owners. So in this case, we had to talk to the unit owners and explain that windows are not a decision made by unit owners, but are actually decided on by the board. Which leads me to our fiduciary duty. If we could have the next slide. So Section 37 talks to us about what is our duty. And specifically, Section 37 holds us to a very high standard that we have to act honestly and in good faith and exercise the care, diligence, and skill of a reasonable, prudent person. Now, I'm not exactly sure who that reasonable, prudent person is these days, but there's been enough case law and condos have been around since 1968 that we have enough ideas around what that care, diligence, and skill would be if exercised by a reasonably prudent person. But what that means is it opens up for you as a director, if you are a director, an obligation to undertake due diligence. We have to do the work, and let's be realistic, condominiums are multi-million-dollar assets. And so we have to be thoughtful in how we exercise our care as a director. So if we know that we have to replace $9 million worth of windows, what are we going to do? We're going to make sure we get quotes. We're going to make sure we have contracts. We make sure that we protect the corporation. And one of the important things about Section 37 is, alluding to something that Sonja talked about earlier, is that, directors also have to limit their liability, and they limit their liability by relying on the opinions of professionals that they work with. That includes property management service providers, lawyers, accountants, engineers. Board meetings are very important. Why? Because Section 32 of the Act tells us that the board cannot transact any business except in a meeting of directors. This is why it's really key to understand what notice means, and these are documented in parts of the constating documents that Sonja is going to talk about. But you have to be at the board table and you have to have a quorum. Why is that? Well, it's because the legislatures and the people who designed the Condominium Act wanted to ensure that you don't make a decision that could impact all of the unit owners and the corporation in a way that is not debated fully at the board level. So that's why we're all elected as directors, is so that the majority of the board can make a decision after doing its due diligence. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Oh, and it's also important to appreciate that president and secretary are the only two officers required under the Condominium Act. Sometimes your bylaws may give you other options, other positions, depending on the degree of sophistication contemplated for your condo. But at a minimum, you have to have a president and secretary. So what does good governance look like? Well, good governance is made up of a lot of different elements. The first is, I think, being proactive. What does proactivity mean as a board? It means thinking ahead, having agendas, understanding what the issues are in your corporation, understanding through your director's education what your obligations are and what the cycle is of your corporation. A proactive measure typically is setting the budget. How do we set the budget when we're directors? We look at prior years and try to guesstimate on what the expenditures are going to be. We try to take into account reasonable standards, taking into account inflation, which has been a big factor in a lot of budgets, and as well where costs are going to go for us as a condominium corporation. As well, if we could have the next bullet, please. Good communication with owners is important. Why? Because you are helping facilitate the operations of the investment of others. That's why you were elected. So keeping your owners in the loop is very helpful, and it de-escalates a lot of misunderstanding, conflict, and actually can help move the corporation together forward as a community. We also rely on our professionals where appropriate. What that means is if you are deciding whether or not the window replacement is a unit owner vote and you obtain a legal opinion that says it clearly is not, then if it ever went to court, for example, unit owner challenged that decision, you as a board would be able to rely on your professional's opinion and basically say we were well informed when we made the decision, and we could rely as well on Section 37 to say there's no personal liability here for us. We've acted in accordance with the Act. And then being familiar with your governing documents. These are not exciting documents, especially because you're not paid a really high amount to be a director to actually spend the time reading them. But I found that being a condo director myself, that it's very important to be familiar with your governing documents. Sonja is going to be taking you through those documents so you can appreciate the scope and nature of those. So I'm going to turn that over to you now, Sonja.
Thanks, Patricia, and thanks for that nice lead-in about how these documents are so boring. I'm going to try and make them exciting. That was Patrica Elia. She is a lawyer with Elia Associates, who's one of our sponsors today. Thanks, Patricia. So I'm going to talk to you about condominium documents. And you see there we have a pyramid, and we talk about condominium documents in terms of a hierarchy. So some documents trump other documents, and it's really important to understand that hierarchy. So let's take a look at what those condominium documents are. We have the Act. So the Condominium Act is a piece of provincial legislation that applies to all condominiums in Ontario. We have the Declaration, we have the bylaws, we have the rules, and we have policy. So we're going to go into these different sets of documents in a little bit more detail. But in terms of the hierarchy, at the very, very top is the Condominium Act. It's, as I said, it's a piece of legislation, so it trumps everything else. The only thing that really trumps the Condominium Act is the Human Rights Code, and Ashley's going to be talking about that a little bit later on in the second part of this webinar. Under the Act, the next important document in terms of hierarchy is the Declaration. So the Declaration is like the Constitution. It has to comply with the Act. Under the Declaration are the bylaws. They have to comply with the Declaration and the Act. And then under the bylaws, we have the rules, which have to comply with, as you probably guessed, the bylaws, the Declaration, and the Act. And then we have policies. And I'm going to talk about policies in a little bit more detail, but they're at the very, very bottom of the hierarchy pyramid. So let's start with the Declaration. The Declaration, some people describe it as similar to articles of incorporation for a corporation, a general corporation. A lot of us like to talk about the Declaration as the Constitution for your condo. And it's really important to understand that every condo has their own unique declaration. They're not exactly the same. They can be amended after they are first created. So that also lends different condos having different declaration terms. So don't assume that your declaration is the same as the condo next door or the condo in another city. It's really important that you read the exact terms of the declaration that is actually registered on title to the units in your condo. One of the things the declaration will talk about are the use of the units, the boundaries of the units, the percentages of ownership by units. So there is a schedule in the back of the declaration, which has a list of all the units and then a percentage assigned to them. And that's a really important piece of the declaration for anyone to understand, whether you're an owner or you're a board member or you're working with condos. Is that's the percentage that is assigned to your unit for the purposes of ownership, how much you own of the condo, but it's also the percentage that's used to calculate your monthly common expense fees. So that's a really important number to understand and make sure that you know what that is in the declaration. Now, the declaration is not set in stone forever and ever. There are methods by which the declaration can be changed, and there are procedures set out in the Condominium Act to change a declaration, either changes being made by the owners, or in certain circumstances, you may be able to change the declaration by a court order. I'm not going to go into the details of how you do that today. That's sort of beyond the scope of what today's webinar is, but it's important to understand that it's not easy to change the declaration, and it's not meant to be easy. You're going to require either 80 or 90% of owners to consent to a change in the declaration, depending on what it is that's being changed. So let's move on to bylaws. Now, bylaws, they're a little bit easier to change. They require 50% plus one of owners in most cases, although with the amendments to the Condo Act, the latest amendments, there are some changes to that 50% rule to make it a little bit easier to change certain types of bylaws or change bylaws in certain situations. Really what the bylaws cover are how the condo is organized and how it functions. So every condo will have at least one bylaw, which is your general operating bylaw. For most condos, that will be bylaw number 1, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it gets amended and then it will have a new bylaw number. But that will set out sort of how your condo operates. It will detail what are the requirements to be a director, how many directors the condo corporation has. It'll talk about notices for meetings. It'll talk about what happens if you're in arrears of payment, what's the interest rate that's going to be charged. So if you think of your bylaws, they really just talk about how how sort of the day-to-day operations of the condo works, who's running it, how do we hold meetings, what kind of notices do we have to give, etc., things like that. Now, there are some very specific type of bylaws that your condo may have. One of them is a standard unit bylaw, and that standard unit bylaw really has to do with insurance. And I'm going to let, I think Jeff is, or no, Patricia's going to be talking about insurance a little bit later on. So I'll let her go into a little bit more detail about what the standard unit bylaw is. But for purposes of right now, it just has to do with insurance, defining what is the standard unit to which the corporation insures, and then what do owners have to insure above that. And then there's other types of bylaws like borrowing bylaws. So if a corporation wants to borrow money, they have to pass a bylaw to be able to do that. You may find things like an insurance deductible bylaw or a mediation arbitration bylaw. There's a variety of different other bylaws that a corporation can have, but they're not mandatory. Then we move on to the rules. And under the rules, really we're talking about how we control the behavior in a community. And we always say that the rules deal with the 3 Ps, people, parking, and pets. And when you are looking at the rules, one of the interesting things to understand is that the rules are not registered on title, where the bylaws and the declaration are registered on title to your unit. They're easy to get off of title. The rules aren't registered. So if you don't have a copy of the rules, you're going to want to make a request for records to get a copy of the rules from the property management. Or a lot of condos nowadays are posting these documents on their community website so that you can easily download them. A lot of times we will see the rules will deal with things that have to do with nuisances like noise and smells, and acceptable and non-acceptable behavior. We will have rules that deal with the use of facilities in the condominium, dealing with aesthetic issues, what you can and can't put on your front doors, or what color your blinds or drapes have to be, what can be put on balconies, stored on balconies, and not stored on balconies. Those are the types of things that the rules will cover. Now, when it comes to rules, the board decides the rules. So they set the rules up, and then under the Act, under Section 58, they send the rules out to the owners. And unless the owners requisition a meeting, the rules take effect in 30 days. So rules are quite easy to change compared to bylaws and the declaration. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about are the policies. And not all corporations have policies. Some corporations absolutely love policies, and some corporations may just have a few. But it's important to understand that when it comes to policies, there's nothing in the Condominium Act that speaks to policies in terms of being able to enforce them. So it's very important when you have a policy in your condominium corporation that you also have a rule that allows you to enforce those policies. So they usually go hand in hand. But really, policies, I always like to talk about policies as procedures. And so usually the policies will provide guidance on how something happens. What's the procedure? So for example, if you want to rent an elevator because you're moving in or out, there may be a policy on that. There may be a policy on using the community room. There may be a policy on what happens when you don't pay your common expenses on time. So these are really about procedures, what you have to do or what steps will be taken if something happens. They are implemented and designed by the board, and they can they can be quite detailed. And as I said, the most important thing about policies is to make sure that there's actually a rule that allows you to enforce it. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Ashley Lamb, who is a condominium real estate agent here in Barrie with Barrie Condo Corner. And she's going to talk about status certificates. Ashley?
Hi, Sonja. Thank you so much. So status certificates, they're an important legal document which may be requested by a purchaser or any other interested party. So normally this is when you are purchasing a condominium and you're interested in understanding a little bit more about the ins and outs of the condo that you are purchasing. Property management legally has 110 calendar days to prepare the documents for a standard order. The cost is $100, and they will not start preparing the documents until they do have full payment. Many property management companies will offer an expedited service. So instead of waiting the 10 calendar days, you can get it within 2 or 5 days, business days now. But the cost does go up from $100. Some of them charge $200, $300, depending on how fast you do require the documentation. The majority of the status certificates, or I would actually say all of the status certificates, are now ordered online and passed along electronically. Back in the day, maybe even a decade ago, but definitely 2 decades ago, when I first got into real estate, we had to physically drop payment off at property management and then physically go and pick up a very large package and drop it off to the lawyer for review. Luckily now everything is done electronically. Now, items that are included in the status certificate would be the maintenance fees, verifying the maintenance fees for that unit. And if the owner has paid up their maintenance fees and then everything's in order there. Any special assessments that might be planned or going on in the building. The details of the reserve fund, if there are any judgments against the corporation or if the corporation is suing a unit owner. There will also be the number of units that are leased in the complex, and of course, a copy and proof of the condo insurance. That's not your own personal content liability insurance. That would be the building insurance for the complex. It also includes a copy of the declaration, rules, bylaws, and the current budget as well. Now, the status certificate is made up of 2 parts, the actual certificate and the attachments. The responsibility of the board of directors with regards to the status certificate is set out in the bylaw. The bylaw allows the board to delegate the signing of the status certificate, and this is done by motion at a board meeting. Now, due to the quick turnaround time, like if we were to if a buyer was to purchase a property and we need the documentation right away, there might not be a board meeting happening within those few days, and we do require to order it right away. It is actually usual practice to designate the management company or the person responsible to prepare the status certificate as the signing officer. So the person completing the certificate is responsible for the content, and they should also carry appropriate errors and omissions insurance. The certificate should have 2 signatures, and the board should review the certificate and its attachments at least annually to ensure that it is complete and all the information is correct. Now, lastly, I would say that the status certificate is technically only valid for the date that it is actually signed, but most residential lawyers are okay with reviewing a status certificate that's a few weeks old, provided that it was ordered and received within that same calendar month. I think that's pretty much it there, Sonja. I think so.
You're on mute, Sonja.
Sorry, thanks, Patricia.
No problem.
Just a reminder to everyone that if you don't get a status certificate from the condo once you've requested, it's like an all clear on the unit. So condo corporations, directors, you want to make sure those status certificates get issued. And if you don't get a status certificate because you're a purchaser, then I think you really need to question what information are you being told and is it correct? Because a lot of the information you're going to want as a purchaser is going to be found in that status certificate. So that
Yeah.
status certificate's a really important document when you're buying a condo for sure.
Yeah, and if it's not provided up front, in a seller's market, a lot of the times it's provided up front, but it is a condition that you would put in your offer on the review of the documentation for sure.
Thanks, Ashley. And if you have any questions about status certificates or any questions about any of the other topics we've covered so far, don't forget to put them into the Q&A box. There are some questions there, and we will get to those shortly. We have one more session before the Q&A, and we're going to go back to Ashley Winberg, who is going to talk to us about how you request documents. So Ashley, I'm going to pass it back to you, and then after that, we'll do our first question and answer period.
All right. So there are two different types of documents. There are core records. These usually include your corporation's governing documents that Sonja discussed, its declaration, the bylaws, rules, record of owners, mortgagees, minutes from board and owners meetings within the last 12 months, and any current fiscal year budgets. There are also non-core records. Some examples of a non-core record would be the corporation's reserve fund, minutes of owners meetings and board meetings that were held more than 12 months prior. So those are the two different types of records, and that is important to keep in mind because there are different timelines and costs associated when someone requests a record. So if someone wants to request a record, there is a formal process that needs to be followed, and it's set out in the Condominium Act and the regulations. So the first step is the requester needs to submit a request using the specific government form issued by the ministry. So it's the same form for core or non-core records. The corporation, upon receiving the request, has 30 days to respond to that request, again, using a specific government form issued by the ministry. Condominium Corporation needs to review the request to determine whether or not the requester is in fact entitled to the records requested, whether any redactions need to be made for privacy reasons or related employment law or ongoing litigation, and to determine the costs that the corporation is entitled to charge to provide the records. So under the Condominium Act, requesters are not entitled to records or portions of records that relate to employees of the corporation, with the exception of employment contracts, actual or contemplated litigation, other units or other unit owners, or any other matters that are found in the general reg to the Condominium Act. Upon a corporation receiving a records request for core records, the condominium can charge the requester a limited fee for copies or access to that core record. If the person is asking for a paper copy, the condominium corporation can charge a maximum of 20 cents per page. If the person is asking for an electronic copy of that record, but the corporation only has it in hard copy for some very odd reason, the condominium corporation can provide a paper copy, but they can't charge any additional cost for doing so, even if they actually print it and go through photocopying it. If the person is requesting a non-core record, the corporation can charge the individual a reasonable fee for potential redactions, printing at 20 cents per page generally, as well as delivery costs that the corporation anticipates that it will incur in having to produce the records requested in the requested format. So if in this particular instance, if someone wants an electronic copy of the record, but the corp doesn't have it electronically, the corp can provide a paper copy and charge them a cost associated with doing so. So corporations their rights to charge owners and requesters for copies of records they can generally charge more if it's a non-core record, where it's restricted if it's a core record. The corporation has to provide that response that details, okay, if they're entitled to it, if they're not, why, anticipated cost within 30 days using that specific government form within 30 days of the corp receiving the request. So the corporation hands the request or the response to the individual who requested the record. That person then has 60 days upon receipt from the corporation's response to determine what they want to do. They have to determine if the fee that the corporation is charging is reasonable, if they believe that any reasons given by the corporation as with respect to why a potential record cannot be provided is valid, and if the individual has a issue with potentially the cost or the response provided by the corporation, or if the corporation didn't respond, they can file an application to the Condominium Authority Tribunal, which we often refer to as CAT. Let's say the individual is satisfied with the response, they can then respond. There's like a little portion of the form to fill out at the bottom, fill out that little portion of the response form and submit it to the corporation within 60 days. The corporation then has to provide the record requested upon receipt of that response. If that record is a core record, the corporation has to provide it within 7 days of the person basically saying, yes, I want that record, and providing any fees related to doing so. So one thing to keep in mind for a condominium corporation is if you're providing if there are any redactions, anything being like taken out or, thick black marker or what have you in a document that's being provided, you need to actually provide a reason for generally each redaction. So that's something that sometimes corporations overlook or forget. If the individual so for a core record, that has to be turned over within 7 days. If the individual is asking for a non-core record, that has to be turned over within 30 days. And if the actual costs were less than if the actual costs that the corporation incurred were actually less than anticipated or what the person paid, the corporation then has to, pay the difference or issue a refund. If the actual costs were more than the actual fee paid, then the individual has to pay. There's the difference between the actual amount paid in the actual costs, or 10% of the total costs incurred by the corporation, or 10% of the fee that the individual paid. So long story short, if your corporation receives a record request, it's just easiest if you accurately anticipate the costs at the onset when you submit that response to the individual. So the individual then gets the record, and then if they're satisfied with the record, it's sort of the end of the road for them. However, if they're not, they then have the option of submitting a dispute to CAT, the Condominium Authority Tribunal, or if they did not get the records as well, they can do so. And I'll turn it over, I believe, now to Sonja for the question period.
All right, thanks, Ashley. All right, so we're going to do our first question and answer period, and we like to take some time to be able to answer your questions because we feel that this is what sets our webinar apart from sort of the basic online course that you can take through the CAO. So you actually get to ask questions to live people who can give you live answers. So the first question that we got was, Patricia, I think I'm going to send this to you because it deals with the board of directors and governance, and you covered that topic. The question was, how does the Condo Act relate to the Not-for-Profit Corporations Act with regards to governance, boards of directors, etc.?
Well, they're actually two very separate pieces of legislation. The Condo Act is an entity unto itself, and it doesn't take any direction from the Non-for-Profit Corporations Act. That's because the Condo Act, it has so many unique features in terms of its design, in that, it's not like we talked about, the fact that you have to have, for example, business transacted at meetings. So they're very special rules for condos. And so it stands apart. It has no connection to the Non-for-Profit Corporations Act.
Thanks, Patricia. And Ashley, there was a question about records, so I'm going to send this one to you. It says, how often is the condo to provide core records to an owner? Owner had a stat certificate. Within the year, they requested copies of the declaration, bylaws, and policies.
They are submitting the request, they're paying the fee, and they're following the process. To the best of my knowledge, the corporation would have to provide the core documents unless if the person's asking for something that's not a core record, the corporation then has some more leeway to dispute their repetitive requests. But if it's a core record like a declaration and they're paying any amounts and they're following the process that needs to be followed, in my opinion, the corporation would have to provide them with that record.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ashley. I don't think there's a limit on how many times a person can ask the core record. And some corporations are being very proactive as they're creating, community websites and posting all their core documents on the website. And so owners don't even need to make a request for records. They can just be directed to the website and download the record there. So Patricia, anything you want to add to that question?
Well, I think you could just go to the CAT too. If it's repetitively not being done, just bring your application and the CAT will give you an order and award costs most likely against the corporation. So to affect compliance with the request, that might be the only way to do that.
No, the
So,
question was, how many times can an owner make a request? Is there a limit on the
how many
amount,
times?
how many times they can make a
Oh,
request?
there's no limit.
There's a
But
series of
we do have
cases.
we do have through our firm a series of cases where we've actually had to challenge that. We had one board that received, I think, something like 75 or 90 requests from one unit owner repetitively for no real purpose other than I think to annoy the board. And we had to we provided the documents, but there was a point where the board, the CAT said, this is vexatious, it's not appropriate, and you won't be able to ask for these records again, or you'll have to go through a different process. So I think, at the outset, the idea is share your information. Why are you holding it? But I can understand how it can be tedious and not appropriate, and even borders on harassment in some of the cases that we've experienced through our firm.
Yeah, I think when it comes
There
to
was another question to what Patricia answered it. There's, I guess, if the management company is not providing the core record consistently within 30 days.
Yeah,
As
sorry, I
Patricia
thought that's
said,
where we were focusing on.
yeah, sorry.
yeah,
As
we haven't
Patricia
got
said,
there yet.
yeah, sorry.
Just back to this question about the limit on how many times an owner can ask for a core record.
Yeah.
My experience with CAT, they're gonna make you give it. They're not gonna not order you to give a core record. So I wouldn't even fight it, even if it's the 150th time. Put it on your website. Maybe that'll stop them from asking about it.
Yeah, exactly. I think the accessibility piece and the use of technology will save everybody a lot of frustration.
Yeah. So, questions are getting answered.
Sorry, I did that. I won't do that again.
Yeah, don't answer them because then I don't see them and then I can't ask them out loud.
Won't touch it.
Okay, so just a follow-up to the Nonprofit Corporations Act question, Patricia. There was a question that said, I would have thought that the Non-for-Profit Corporations Act trumps the Condo Act as all condo corps are non-for-profit, but not all non-for-profits are condo corps, especially when it comes to directors' fiduciary duty and duty of care. Do you just want to comment on that briefly, and then we can sort of wrap that series of questions up on that?
I can understand that logic application because really condos could arguably be a subset of non-for-profit definitions. But again, in Ontario, condos are in a separate category and they are not, the only thing that trumps it, I think Sonja mentioned, is the Human Rights Code in terms of providing guidance or another level that will overstep the condo parameters. And even then, it doesn't necessarily overstep the Condo Act. It oversteps or it trumps the declaration, the bylaws, and the rules, the constating docs. So no, it's logical, but condominiums stand on their own and they create their own interpretation through their own framework legislatively.
And in the act itself, in the Condominium Act, there's also a section that says the Business Corporations Act doesn't apply.
Right.
to condominium corporations. I don't
Yes.
think it specifically deals with the Not-for-Profit Corporations
doesn't.
Act, but as Patricia said, the condominiums, we're operated under the Condominium Act. That's the legislation that governs us.
Mhm.
All right, and to tie up the records question, just to make sure we don't lose it, the flip side to the first question about how many times can an owner make the request, the other question we got, and I'm going to send this to you, Ashley, is what if an owner continually requests a core record, and they use the proper form, but the property manager fails to provide the core record within 30 days? What does the owner do? Ashley?
You can submit it to CAT. That would be your best course of action if it's continuously happening. And you don't need a lawyer to do so. It's a very accessible website that you can represent yourself if you'd like to do so.
Right. And just so
That's
that
my
everybody,
recommendation.
we're going to talk about CAT a little bit later, but CAT is operated through the Condominium Authority of Ontario. And so if you want to access the CAT or get information about the CAT, you can go to the Condominium Authority of Ontario's website. All right. And there is one more question. Difference between core records and non-core records. Ashley, I know you talked about it when you were explaining this, but can you just give a very brief, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, core records are records within like last 12 months that are your corporation's governing documents, declaration, bylaw, last 12 months of minutes, whereas non-core records are basically everything else. There are a ton of records that corporations need to keep for set periods and different periods of time under the Condominium Act regulations. So basically a non-core record is everything else that is not the corporation's governing documents and board meeting minutes and financial statements within the last 12 months.
All right. And again, the CAO website has some information about core and non-core records. And I think they do have a chart as well that you could probably access there. All right. Somebody had a question about what is the CAT. We're going to talk about that in the second half, Doreen. So if we don't answer your question by then, just put it back into the Q&A and we can take that question on. Another question. Is it a big undertaking to change a condo type, move it from a common elements only condo corp, I guess, to a standard condo corp? Ashley, do you want to take that on? Because you talked about the different types of condos.
Well, I know you can't amalgamate two different types. I haven't actually changed a condo type. I would anticipate that, yes, it would be a big undertaking whenever you're amalgamating or terminating. It is a big undertaking. It's not a simple process. It's amending all the documents, getting Planning Act approval, municipal approval. It is a significant and costly undertaking. Yes.
Patricia, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I don't think they'll always allow it, depending, because I think you'd really have to terminate the condo in its structure and then redesign it, define it in a different interpretation. Like if you're common element and then you decide to become standard, like Ashley was saying, there's so much foundational work that would have to be redone that I think it wouldn't be a transition. It would be it would be a complete winding down and then starting from scratch.
Which at the end of the day, it's going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it would be logical if they had thought about it, and even amalgamation is really not contemplated anywhere. And I've looked into it. It's not a concept that has been thought about, but given in Huronia how many small condos we have, it would actually be very helpful if somebody designed a legislative process to allow that to happen.
All right.
For similar types of condos.
Okay, John, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just I've run across a couple older declarations where they don't have a Schedule C, and the body of the declaration is written in such a manner that the unit boundaries extend out to the rear fences, the side fences, the front curb, and so on. So essentially, would have been in modern times registered as a common element condo, but it was just simply registered as a condo back in 1973. And I don't see a point in spending the money to change it to a common elements condo now that we have that definition, when the words speak for themselves in the declaration itself.
All right, thanks, John. Okay, next question. Anonymous, you asked about board meetings, whether they can be held electronically or by teleconference and emails. I'm going to put that question on hold because right after this Q&A period, Patricia's going to talk about meetings and she can address that question there. Question from Rob. Any legal recourse or assurance to drive accountability for errors or omissions in status certificates? Who do you report these to? All right.
Well, there was a recent case at the end of last year that dealt with a deficient status certificate, and I know our firm is going to be involved in trying to see if whomever was responsible for that can be held accountable. But I guess if it's the property manager who has full authority to issue the status certificate, the CMRAO. However, I think at the end of the day, you have to look very carefully at what is stated in the management agreement in terms of what responsibility is being delegated and if the corporation or the board have a right to opine on or tell the manager if they know of something that should be included. It's really,
I think
in my,
Yeah.
I think you have to look at this from whose perspective, because if you're talking about a purchaser and there's a mistake in the status certificate, the corporation is bound by what's in the status certificate. If you're looking at, does the corporation have recourse against someone else? That's sort of what Ashley's talking about. So I think, Rob, it really depends on who is the one that's sort of finding the mistake or having the negative impact on the mistake. But corporations are bound by their status certificates. Patricia, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's along the lines of what you're speaking to, Sonja, is that, it really depends also on what the error is and where the damages are and where the source of responsibility would have come from. Because I've got one right now where status certificate was issued, but there was no error per se on the face of it, except that somebody interpreted the status certificate as confirming title, which is not what it does. That's not part of the job of a status certificate. So it's very interesting. It depends on where the issue is that's arising, that's giving rise to the conflict.
Right.
just a reminder, status certificate, all the documents included form part of the status certificate. Make sure you're provided with all the documents that are referred to as attachments.
Yeah. All right. There was another question about increasing the number of directors from 3 to 5. How many unit owners have to support that? That's a bylaw amendment, so it's 50% plus 1. And then we had a question about, this is our last question, and then we'll move on. It says, our declaration says no pets. We have many unit owners who have bought in our condo because they are allergic to the point where they could die. Now a unit owner has a doctor's note that needs a companion dog. This is not a service dog. What should we do? Well, I'm just going to say that's a very complicated question, and that is way beyond the scope of this webinar in terms of answering that specifically, other than go get some legal advice about what you should do. But Ashley's going to be talking about other laws that apply to condos at the end of the webinar today, and the Human Rights Code is one of those. So hopefully you'll get a little bit more information, but that is very specific, and you do need to get some legal advice on how to handle that type of situation. All right. So that takes us through our first question and answer period. Don't be afraid to put questions in the Q&A box because we are going to have another Q&A session at the very end of the webinar. But right now we're going to move on to our next topic, and Patricia is going to speak about meetings.
Okay, thank you very much. So as I mentioned, condos are democratic in their design, and so there are mandatory meetings, and it's important to meet with your stakeholders. Those are the unit owners. So we have the annual general meeting, one of the most important meetings in the context of a condo, where the board calls a meeting, all unit owners are invited, and there are specific pieces of business that need to be transacted. For example, the election of directors, the appointment of the auditors, the approval of the minutes. These are all important because, the role of an auditor, for example, is not to represent the corporations, it's to represent the unit owners. That's why it's done at a unit owner meeting. So when you're looking at your meetings, you have to make sure that notice is done appropriately. And there are other requirements that we're going to go through in terms of talking about timing. But then we also have voluntary meetings as well. Information meetings are a perfect way of describing a voluntary meeting. You don't really need to vote on anything, but you want to talk about an issue. Like, for example, electric vehicle charging. A lot of people need context. They need to understand what's the plan for the corporation? What are the options available? What is our capacity? That's an information meeting, and the board can call that and invite people to it. Sometimes we call them town halls instead of calling them meetings, so that we don't necessarily have to take minutes. It depends on what you're trying to achieve with the meeting and what you're going to be communicating. But often, this form of communication is very important for unit owners to keep them apprised. And then we have those meetings that unit owners want to have held. And sometimes we will see a requisition to request for example, the removal of the board of directors. That's where people are really not happy. Often they're not happy about one or more things, and they have a right under the Act as unit owners to get 15% of the unit owners to agree to a requisition to discuss a topic. Now, sometimes requisitions are not always valid. For example, a requisition which was received in my window file was a requisition to vote on the approval of the windows and the investment in the same. Well, that's not a valid requisition because it's not within the purview of the unit owner's decision-making powers. So these are three important types of meetings that the Act sanctions and allows. So if we could go to the next slide. So unit owner meetings are built on communication, and really you're trying to answer what and fulfill the expectations of your community. So by communicating effectively, and communication is a two-way street. Communication is not just giving out information, but listening to the community. Sometimes when we see a requisition, even if it's not valid, we advise our clients to hold a meeting. Say, you know what, we're not going to vote on it, but we know this is bothering you. Let's talk about it. Let's get to the core of it. Let's hear what you have to say. Engaging. So how do you engage your unit owners at their meetings? Well, you can ask them questions in advance. You could ask them to submit their questions in advance. You could give surveys, for example, and share those results at the unit owner meeting. Respect. Respect is very important in undertaking meetings, I think. When I chair meetings, I always insist on everybody behaving in a respectful way. And if you can't, I'll let you take a break and come back in when you can be respectful to everybody. But why is that? Because this is a meeting not just for one or two people, it's for everybody. So engagement, participation, lack of intimidation, these are all key elements to holding unit owner meetings. So in terms of the types, or how we go about doing this, notice is prescribed under the Act. We can't make it up. And what the 2017 changes brought into effect is preliminary notice. What that does is it gives everybody the heads up that we are going to be having a meeting, and would you like something added to the agenda, for example. So now, under the statute, we have to give preliminary notice, and it's at least 15 days before we have to send out the notice of meeting. These timelines are really tight under the Act, because what this means is you have to give notice. You have 15 days within which to let the board know, you know what, I would like you, since it's the AGM, we're appointing an auditor, I would like you to add this name of another auditor to our list of auditors. Here's their bio or whatever other information you have. So what it does is it actually provides that engagement. It is prior communication, so people are not in the dark on what's going to be on the agenda, and it gives you an advanced component to participate. These deadlines have to be executed in really tight order so that when we get to notice a meeting being sent out, it's sent out at least 15 days before the actual meeting. What I like to do is tell clients to give themselves buffers so that they have adequate timeframes within which to execute. Because one of the interesting things about this is it has to be practical. If property management is photocopying, putting together packages, etc., it's really important that we give everybody adequate time to get items on the agenda, put the content in the package, and serve the notice properly. I was just advising somebody who had an AGM scheduled, and the AGM notice was 1 day short. And this individual brought it to the attention of the community, and they decided to postpone the AGM and reschedule it. Why? Because it wouldn't be duly constituted. So if they're voting on important things, and I've mentioned all the important things that are being done, they could be challenged at a later date. So even though it was inconvenient, it was very beneficial that the meeting didn't go ahead and transact business because it wouldn't have been under a valid notice and therefore could be called into question. Back to you, Sonja.
Thanks, Patricia. Okay, so we're now going to have Jeff come back, and Jeff is not only our CCI Huronia president, but he is also a property manager with Shortest Slope, and he is going to talk about the difference between property managed condos and self-managed condos. Jeff?
Thanks, Sonja. So there's three basic types of managing a condominium in Ontario. You've got your self-managed group where the board of directors manage the affairs of the corporation, everything from collecting the common element fees and arranging all the day-to-day services and contracts for the corporation, paying the vendors, etc. There's what's called direct hire, where they hire a professional property manager to work directly with them. The direct hire would need to be a licensed property manager in Ontario. And then the third is a professional management company that has a team of property managers and support staff that manage a portfolio of properties. There's benefits of each of these. Self-management, sometimes it's a smaller condominium corporation, townhouse style, where they're trying to keep costs low and feel that the cost of professional management might be out of their reach. That can often be offset by economies of scale and the ability of the professional manager obtaining services at discounted rates because they've built a rapport with service providers in different categories at much lower rates. Direct hire, that person's working directly for the condo. They're on site typically. They aren't spreading their time across a number of clients and they're dedicated to the needs of the condo that they are hired for. The downside of that is it's typically one of the most expensive options. Professional management company that manages multiple properties has a team of managers and support staff. Kind of fits in between there. It's more cost effective. You have redundancies and coverage when there's illnesses or vacation times and a larger knowledge base and experience base to draw upon as well. In Ontario, since 2017, anyone practicing as a property manager needs to be licensed. If they're working for a management firm, that firm also has to have a management services provider license, and that's all governed by the CMRAO, which is a government third-party body, the Condominium Manager Regulatory Authority of Ontario. Moving on, the Next, I'll just add there's also been a hybrid approach where self-managed condominium might engage a property management company or property manager in a limited capacity to help with some of the more intricate items of arrears collection, filing all the annual returns with the CAO, the periodic information certificates, ICUs, etc. Just to help them out in an administrative capacity. The board's still very hands-on, looking after a lot of the day-to-day things and overseeing maintenance and so on. We're seeing that becoming a little bit more popular since the act was amended in 2017. So what's the relationship and what are the responsibilities between the board and management? The board of directors set out the policies, they approve the budgets, they hire the manager, they approve projects. The manager or the management company then implements those policies set out by the board. They prepare the budget for the board to review review and approve. They hire staff where needed if it's a high-rise building or a building that has a number of units. Perhaps there's cleaning staff, there might be security, etc. They'll obtain quotes for repairs, maintenance, services that the condominium requires. In the case of a self-managed condominium, the board of directors is going to be doing all of those functions. They're going to be setting the policies and then they're going to be implementing them. They're going to be not only preparing the budget, but they're also going to be approving it as well. Moving on, the next session is planning. That's me as well, so might as well move into that one, please, Sonja. So having an annual plan or even a multi-year plan is important. Setting board meeting dates in advance is very beneficial. Having that time blocked off in advance instead of trying to scramble to get a meeting together. The larger the board, the harder it is to coordinate. When you have set dates for the calendar year or a set date on a monthly, bi-monthly basis, say the third Thursday of the month, etc., it makes it much easier for everyone involved to have that in their calendar. And then setting reminders for contract renewals, reviewing those contracts ahead of time, determining if there's a need to tender those contracts. That should be planned in advance. Of course, meetings with owners, whether it's annual general meeting, special general meeting, town halls. If you've got large projects coming up, should always plan for those and be well prepared. And then there's other items that need to be planned for: your annual audit, reserve fund planning, routine notices, whether it's the information certificates to the owners, the annual return to the CAO, so forth. And then planning other key items. Your operating budget for the year is one of the things that should definitely be on your plan so that you're ready to go. And fire safety plan review, large contracts, reviewing the performance of those service providers. We highly recommend to our boards having an on-site meeting where you review the common elements of the corporation at least once a year. Spring is the most common, but have a look at your common elements. Are there any trip hazards? Are there any fire safety hazards? Are there issues with grounds maintenance, etc.? We often recommend doing one in the fall as well, being prepared for the winter season and making sure there's no low areas in the walkway or the parking lot that might attract water and then freeze and become a slip and fall hazard. So trying to mitigate any risks. That I think we're moving on to the money man.
All right, thanks, Jeff. All right, and so we have a new face with us right now, and that is Blair Spinney. He is our treasurer for our chapter, but he's also a condo auditor, and he's going to be talking about budgets, money, and banking. Blair.
Well, thank you very much, Sonja. I don't know how new this face is, but anyway.
New to tonight. Nobody's seen
new
you
to
yet.
tonight. Okay. All right. So yes, we're going to talk about budgets, common elements, fees, and collections. So first of all, money coming in the door, budget. So the first thing you have to do is have a budget. So the budget will include a budget for operations and the allocation for the reserve fund, which is going to be the next topic, I think. Yes, it is. And this is so this compiles all of our expenses, and that's what's going to determine what we need to collect from owners. It's set annually and does not require the vote of the owners. So it's the board that's doing that. Once the budget is approved, the board should send a budget letter and a copy of the budget to every owner. And for large increases, the board should consider holding an owner meeting. We're talking about meetings before, so this would just be an information meeting after the budget has been prepared. So this is if it's a very large increase. So as far as collections go, the industry standard is that owners pay by pre-authorized payments, electronic payments. And you can use post-dated checks, but it is a more work for your management. And like I say, the standard is pre-authorized payments. Cash should never be accepted for common element assessments or any other payment owed by a resident or owner. So we tend to lose part of the audit trail when that happens. If there is difficulty collecting amounts from owners, the corporation has the right to register a lien against the unit. And of course, that's when they enforce the payment through power of sale. That's one way to make sure that the corporation can ensure a collection of all fees. So the next thing we're going to talk about is money in banking. First of all, under the Act, Condominium Act, the corporations are required to maintain at least one bank account for the operations and one for the reserve fund. So you can have more than one bank account, and you can also have an investment account for especially for your reserve fund, which is rather prudent if you've built up a lot of money. So the amount of fees should be collected on the first of the month. The monthly fees, we split the budget into 12 monthly payments. And it's collected on the first of the month and deposited in the operating account on the first day. And a transfer for the reserve portion of those fees should be made the following day. So it's important to make sure the money gets straight into the reserve. The next item is check signing. To ensure timely utility payments, most corporations use pre-authorized payments. So that's just to make sure the money automatically comes out of the account. There's usually not too much negotiation to do with your utility bills. So that's just to make sure that gets looked after right away. For check signing, minimum of 2 signing authorities is recommended. And it can be by check or online payments. So online payments is becoming more and more popular. Vendors can submit their invoices electronically. They can be approved by management electronically. and approved by the board electronically. It's all pretty seamless, clean, and tends to take a much less time turnaround. No one forgets the checks in the back of their trunk, in the trunk of their car. So that way your vendors get paid on time. So really there's three options with regards to the signing of checks or online payments. Two directors can sign each check. You can have two officers of the management company sign each check. There, it's probably good to have some compensating control because, of course, the board's job is to provide oversight. So generally, it's possible to have some other controls in place to make sure that the board is aware of what authorizations are allowed and what's going on financially. The other option, probably the most predominant, is one director and one officer of the management company to sign each check. Now, I've seen when it's electronic payments, I see everyone signing, everyone's authorizing. I see management authorizing the payments, and then at least a couple of board members, and then everything's making sure everything's together. The payables person makes sure that everything is done before the actual payment is issued. For proper financial for risk management, the site manager should never be a signatory on corporation checks as they issue payment approvals and purchase orders. So the whole idea behind that is that as much as possible, auditors like to see segregation of duties. So, you have the initiation of a transaction, the approval of a transaction, and the execution of the transaction. Oh, I just lost my. I guess I should be using wireless headphones. So we were talking about yes, site manager and segregation of duties. So that's right. So we want to make sure that they're not signing the checks, they're approving the payments, and they're initiating the payments. So that's one step you want to make sure you take out of the site manager's hands. Monthly financial statements. I think we're doing okay for time here. Usually prepared monthly by the management company. All board members should receive a copy of the statement, and at a minimum, the statement should include the balance sheet, the income and expense statement, the reserve fund statement, an arrears schedule, so any owners that are behind on their payments, a bank reconciliation for the operating and reserve bank accounts. Quite often I see the bank statements are in there as well. So probably one of the more important financial statements in there is the income and expense statement. So that would usually have in there a copy of the budget. So we're basically comparing where we are from on the budget to the actual results for the period to date. So that's probably one of the most important controls for the board to operate on the financial statements. So these are the internal financial statements I'm talking about. Once a year, of course, we do the external financial statements, which are usually audited. So those are considered general purpose financial statements for the owners as well as potential owners. So generally the owners and the potential owners don't have the access and knowledge concerning the details of the finances that management and the board does. So that's why they're usually audited. Also, that it contains more information about uncertainty. So there's information about estimate, contingencies, and risks. Future cash flows. So we give there's details on loans and commitments, and there's generally a presumption of arm's length in financial statements. So in any situation where that is not the case, that would have to be disclosed in the financial statements. So one thing just to clarify though, and make sure that it's quite a misconception, and I have to make sure I don't fall into that trap myself. I'm an auditor. That I always refer to make sure that they are management's financial statements. Sure, the auditor might be preparing them, putting them on their letterhead. They might be doing adjustments, but they all have as a source those internal financial statements. And all of the adjustments they do make need to be approved by both the management and the board. And all the information that's in the notes has to come from management and the board. So it's very important that there's clear lines of communication when the audit's going on about what's actually happening in the corporation. And so that to make sure that the disclosure in the notes to the financial statements is accurate and complete. So that's pretty much it about accounting. I hope everyone's still awake.
All right, thanks, Blair. And we're now going to move on to reserve funds and reserve fund studies. And we have John Juffs with us, who is a CCI Huronia director. He's from Aegis, which used to be Macintosh Perry. John, welcome. And tell us all there is to know about reserve funds and reserve fund studies in 5 minutes or less.
Well, I'll try my very best. Thank you very much, Sonja, and thank you everyone for attending tonight. It's great to see such engagement, for your communities, because as many people have said and alluded to, you're not exactly the highest paid group, and yet you're doing a great job. So thank you very much. So, for those of you who are looking to take some quick Coles notes, there really are three things when it comes to reserve funds. You actually have to have a fund, you actually have to have a study, and you actually have to have a plan. So if you can remember those three things, fund, study, plan, you're going to be just fine. Now we can get into some of the details. The fund itself is a separate bank account, and you could have multiple separate bank accounts. You could have a fund for your windows, you could have a fund for your parking lot, you could have a fund for your roofs. But all of those things, whether they're separated or in one bank account, and I hope you only have one bank account, would be considered a reserve fund. And this does get commented on by people like Blair, who will look at that and look at the plan and say, looks like you're on track, or it looks like you're off track, and if you're off track, here's the reasons why. Or the corporation is due for an update anyway, so I'm sure the off track part will be corrected. Managing them is, a challenge, because reserve fund planners sort of parachute in once every 3 years to either comment on, or actually every 6 years to look at the site and say, here's what we think is going to happen in the next little while to your common elements. Boards and managers are charged with the responsibility of looking at it every day. And so, you have to consider that these things are for the major repair and replacement of the common elements and assets of the corporation. So as Ashley Winberg told us earlier, that's everything outside the boundaries of the units, but inside the boundary of the property line, plus anything else that might be considered an asset that you have to save for. The study is a study done by an independent professional, and there's classes of people that can do reserve fund studies as defined in the regulations to the Act. And it's a guide to ultimately help the board in setting the contributions to its reserve fund. And that then gets to my third point, the plan itself. And that's what most people are interested in, is how much money do we have to put in reserve for this estimate of future costs? And there's lots of ways of getting to that plan. I mean, some people will say we want slow, steady increases so that we can have that $1 million in 20 years to do the roof. Or others will say, you know what, we're really strapped for cash. We've got people complaining that they can't make ends meet because of whatever set of conditions, and they will try and keep fees low and try and catch up later. Most planners avoid that kind of planning. It's sort of kicking the can down the road, and that's not the point of the plan. The point of the plan is to make sure that everybody, regardless of where they are in their ownership of their condominium, pays their quote unquote fair share. Now, fair share is dictated by Schedule D in most corporations, where the allocations to common expense fees are set out, and you contribute that amount, and then a proportion of that goes to reserve. And your fair share is also, even though the roof wasn't replaced while you were living there, you enjoyed the use of that roof as a common element, and so you pay your fair share for the use of it. And the thing about condominium living is some of these common elements are pretty hard to see how they benefit you. Like if you live on the ground floor and you're paying for the eventual replacement of the elevators, but that's the joy of living in a condo, is everybody owns the common elements and everybody pays in the cost of replacing them. I think we can probably move on to, is there a second slide, Sonja? Just the one? We're getting into insurance. You're on mute, Sonja.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's just the one slide, John.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if there was a second slide, but I just do want to reiterate again, remember you have to have a fund, separate bank account, a study prepared by an independent professional, and a plan on how you're going to contribute to your fund, a notice of future funding, if you will. And that's one of the notices that's attached to a status certificate for everybody to see. Now I'll hand it over to you, Sonja. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, John. And reserve funds, we spend a whole hour in our intensive directors course on reserve funds. So if you want to get a more in-depth discussion about reserve funds and how the reserve fund study works and how you read the tables and all that, our intensive directors course in April is a good one to join us to get that type of information. So we're going to move on to another hot topic in condos, which is insurance. And Patricia's back to talk to us about that.
Thanks very much. So insurance under the Condominium Act is mandatory. The corporations are obligated to maintain insurance on its own behalf, the corporation's behalf, and on behalf of unit owners for damages to both the standard units and the common elements. So Sonja earlier on had talked about the standard unit, and the standard unit is something that is anticipated by the Act to be in existence, but not every condo has a standard unit bylaw. Standard unit sets the parameters for restoration to a unit in the event of an insurable loss. So you insure for major perils, you have an insurable loss, and then your standard unit kicks in. And that's a very important piece of the puzzle, because what it does is it helps identify and even control the cost of insurance by setting parameters. We can go in depth into insurance and talk about standard unit bylaws that are bare bones and then full replacement, but that's not part of this seminar. But I encourage you, when we are doing an in-depth insurance seminar, to come back and hear about that. Because the standard unit, as I said, can also control your costs. We've come out of a hard market. The market is starting to soften slightly. But what has happened in the hard market is we saw a drastic increase in both premiums and deductibles. I saw, 250% increases in deductibles. Some condos going from 10,000 right to 250,000 right on the event of one flood. So the market has been very hard and tight. And so now it's easing off, which means insurance is more readily available and the increases aren't high. Insurance, though, is critical in the life of a condo. And as I said, it's on behalf of the corporation and the unit owner. So why is that important? Well, in our budgets, when we pay the insurance premiums, we're paying them for everything, common elements and units. And sometimes we get confused when somebody floods out our unit, who is going to pay for what? But what's important to appreciate is that the unit owners, because they are insureds under the policy, are paying up to the amount of the deductible. Okay. And that's a very important distinction. They're not paying for the $500,000 worth of damage they've caused. They're paying up to the $10,000 deductible because they are insured. So when we have an insurable loss, it's important that we decide whether we're going to make a claim. These days, because of the hard market, the rule has come through, in many people, through many condos as an industry standard, only if the loss is 3 times your deductible is it worth putting it through. Why? Because otherwise you're driving your premiums up. So what that means is there's a gap, because unit owners are only going to be responsible up to the amount of the deductible, irrespective of whether you put it through the policy. So it's something to think about in terms of how do we fund that, and who funds it? The unit owners will fund it if you decide to not put it through insurance. But on the insurance side, it's also important to contemplate unit owner insurance. And this is where the standard unit and unit owner insurance all come together. Why that's important? Unit owner insurance on the unit, on betterments improvements is not mandatory. Now, I personally think it should be because you want to know that there's coverage there, but it's not mandatory. Even if it's in your documents, there's a debate whether it's easy to enforce. I think it's hard to enforce, but I think it's doable. But when you have your standard unit, you only get insurance coverage up to the standard unit. Betterments improvements in the suite, for example, the mahogany cabinets, the gold faucets, the marble countertops, they may be excluded if the standard unit says only up to general contractor standards. Okay, so unit owner insurance would cover those improvements and betterments. And as well, now under certain policies, depending on who the broker is and the insurance provider, you actually can get coverage for the deductible. So what that means is you pay your deductible on your unit owner insurance, and then your insurer will pay the deductible under the corporation's insurance. Usually the upper limit of that is $250,000 coverage, which is the highest deductible I've seen to date, even out of this hard market. So it is actually wise to encourage unit owners to look into insurance, obtain insurance, but make sure the coverage is good, and also ensure that you have a standard unit in place. Discussing that with your counsel is important to understand which type of standard unit you're going to go with so that it makes sense for your condo. Thanks, Sonja.
Thanks, Patricia. And I put in the chat an upcoming course that we have at the end of February, which is our Director Certificate program, and it's the insurance section. So if anybody wants a more in-depth insurance discussion, you can always sign up for that course. Unfortunately, today we can only sort of scratch the surface on these topics, but if you want more information, that's another great opportunity to learn more about insurance. So I'm going to talk about enforcement, and excuse me. Enforcement is something that unfortunately condominium corporations and owners need to deal with because we live in a community and not everybody always gets along. So the question then becomes, well, what happens when people don't follow the rules? And so there's a couple of different avenues available to condominium corporations and to owners when it comes to enforcement. But before we get into which route do you take and you start filing legal claims, my biggest advice to everyone is communicate with each other, because a lot of problems can be solved by communication. And so one of the biggest ways to deal with non-enforcement, with non-compliance of your governing docs is to actually communicate. And you would be surprised how many owners, they don't even know they're breaking the rules because they don't know what the rules are. So as a condominium corporation, if you're a director, a property manager, you're running the condominium corporation, one of the best things you can do is educate your owners about what the rules of your condo are. What does your declaration say? What do the bylaws say? What do the rules say? Make sure owners are aware of that. And a variety of ways of doing that. You can have an information package for people who come to the condo for the first time. So new owners, because I can tell you, most people don't read their status certificates. You could do information sessions. Patricia talked about, information meetings that you can have that are informal owners meetings. Some people do it over sort of a coffee or tea break in the community room, maybe once a week or once a month. There are a variety of ways to get the information out, but be proactive about it. And, the first step to making sure people comply is making sure they understand what the rules are. But if that doesn't work and you still have situations where you have to enforce the rules, there are a variety of options. Sometimes, depending again on what the dispute is about, you may have to go to mediation and arbitration. Sometimes you may go to court, sometimes you may go to CAT, and CAT is the Condominium Authority Tribunal. So it's a specialized tribunal just for condominium matters. It has limited jurisdiction. Currently, right now, the CAT has the jurisdiction to deal with any disputes about records. So if owners are requesting records, they don't get those records, that issue goes to CAT. It also deals with nuisance type claims. So noise, vibration, smoke, light, odor. And then it also deals with parking and storage issues, vehicles, pets and animals, and it deals with any chargebacks in relation to any of those issues. So the important thing to understand about CAT is that it has limited jurisdiction. You can't bring every issue to CAT, but it is there to deal with most of the common issues that we're finding in condos. And so nowadays, most issues do go to CAT. They don't go to court, and they don't necessarily go to mediation and arbitration. So at the end of the day, in order to figure out where you have to go, you have to understand what the subject matter of your dispute is. You probably will want to get some legal advice about which is the proper route to take, because if you head down the wrong route to begin with, that could cause more problems and increase your costs overall in order to resolve that dispute. And I'm going to leave it at that for now, because again, enforcement's another topic that we could spend an hour or two talking about. And we're going to move over to Ashley Winberg, who's going to talk to us about other laws that apply to condominiums besides the Condominium Act. Ashley?
Okay, there's many, but as Sonja said, join us for our director's course in the spring where we'll talk about all of them in detail. It's going to go through a high level. There's the Occupiers Liability Act. Under that, condominiums, they are the occupiers of their common elements, so they have a duty to take care under the act to protect people while on the common elements from foreseeable harm. If your corporation has any employees or if you retain directly any independent contractors, your corporation in that relationship would be subject to the Employment Standards Act. Some cleaning staff, superintendents, and security personnel at condos, they are unionized. So in those workplace environments, the Labor Relations Act would apply. Something new, there was legislation passed after COVID called the Working for Workers Act. And under this legislation, people who are making deliveries, to a condo that arguably is a workplace, if you have, let's say, a concierge, they have to be granted access to the washroom if one is in fact situated on the common elements. However, access can be denied if providing access is not reasonable for health and safety reasons or due to security concerns. There's the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So condominiums have an obligation to protect workers while on their property while in their workplace from incidents of workplace violence and harassment. And so condominiums have an obligation under that legislation to develop, implement, and monitor workplace violence and harassment policies, procedures, training, and investigation. There's also the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. You have to ensure that people who are working on your property are registered with the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. You do have an obligation to request clearance certificates from them, which is proof that they are in fact registered every 45 days. There's also a variety of different municipal short-term rental bylaws and codes. Each municipality is different. For new condos, if you're a standard condo and you're not a conversion, you would be subject to the Ontario New Home Warranties Plan Act, that's TARION. As Jeff Struewing, our president, mentioned, there's also the Condominium Management Services Act, which governs the property management industry and their regulations and requirements. In the privacy realm, there's the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, and that provides sort of a guideline for the best practices for the use, collection, storage, and disclosure of personal information. And sort of the one that we generally receive the most questions about in this webinar is Human Rights Code. The Human Rights Code prohibits discrimination and harassment against individuals or groups on a variety of enumerated grounds. And last I recall, there are 16. So a condominium is subject to the Human Rights Code. And as Sonja says, that can at times trump the Condominium Act and a corporation's governing documents, because the condominium as a housing provider does have an obligation to accommodate occupants, as well as also as an employer if there are employees or workers on site. Under the code, there are two different types of discrimination. There's adverse effect discrimination, which is when you, let's say you implement a rule about no pets, but actually no, let's say you implement a rule about no swimming in the pool. Children can't swim in the pool between the hours of 4 and 10 p.m. That could have a discriminatory impact on families with young children, because that may be the only time when the kids can actually use the pool when they're out of school. So that's adverse effect discrimination. And then there's also, direct discrimination, which is when someone is treated differently because of an enumerated ground. And most of the time, we speak of in condominiums accommodations. So if there is a provision in the declaration that says no pets, and someone says they have a disability for which they require an animal or something, an animal to live with them to assist them with their disability related needs so that they can live independently, the corporation may have an obligation to accommodate them up to the point of undue hardship. And there is a lot of legislation and articles out there about that exact topic. I'll turn it over to you, Sonja, for questions now.
Okay, thanks, Ashley. So before we get to questions, I just want to highlight some upcoming educational events that we have at CCI Huronia. We have our intensive directors course on April 13th and 14th. We have a session on March 27th about what is condo strength. This is a program that CCI operates for condo directors. So if you want to learn about condo strength, what it's all about, how you can participate, sign up for this session on March 27th. We have our insurance fundamentals director certificate program course on February 28th. So if you want some more information, in-depth discussion and information about insurance, this is a great course to take, and it counts towards the programs that you have to qualify for your director certificate. And then we also have our monthly lunch and learns, which go from 12 to 1 p.m. on Fridays. And our upcoming lunch and learns on February 23rd, we're talking about strategies to prolong the service life of your common elements. On March 22nd, we're talking about condo governance, conflicts of interest, and director ethics. May 24th, we're talking about the do's and don'ts of filing an insurance claim. And on June 21st, we are talking about hoarding. So these are our upcoming events, basically from now to the end of June. If you want to register for any of these events or find out more information, you can go to our website at ccihuronia.com and click on upcoming events. We will also be holding an in-person event in June, and details of that event will be posted on our website as soon as the details have been confirmed. All right, so we have a couple minutes left, and let's take some more questions. Before we do, I just want to reach out one more time and thank our sponsors, Aegis, Nordic Windows and Doors, Integrity Property Management, Select Path Insurance, and Elia Associates. Thank you again for supporting our webinars and supporting our chapter. Okay, Patricia, I'm going to start with you because we didn't really answer the question that was sort of hanging from the last one about board meetings. Can they meet electronically or by teleconference? And can email serial meetings be held? Oh my goodness, such as president polling board members for a decision. I'll let you take that one.
Okay, that's a nice messy one. So on the first side, yes, we can have electronic meetings, and for some of you, you'll know that we actually had to put in place bylaws. The act has changed recently, and so electronic meetings are a go. With that said, they aren't a must, and they're not always required. And we do have bylaws now that allow corporations to have hybrid meetings, and think about the different ways that people will participate. Some people love virtual, others do not. So all three types of meetings are valid depending on if you have, for example, a bylaw in place to permit hybrid. But electronic is definitely a go. Now, with respect to holding a board meeting via email, no. A clear no. You have to be in the same room and be able to communicate with one another in order for it to be a valid meeting. Now, what I do realize, though, is that there is a practical side to how the lives of directors work, because you probably have other things to do with your time. You probably have jobs, and sometimes it's not always convenient to get together. So what is really important here is that even if you as a group of directors all participate in, let's say, saying, you know what, we really need to get this started, we're going to buy an email chain, all agree, you need to go back and ratify that at the next duly constituted meeting, and it has to be seen as a ratification of that decision. Why? Because you're at a duly constituted meeting. It now is then a firm decision of the board that will be binding. And there are consequences for not doing it right. For example, if you agree to sign a contract for a $9 million window replacement, you can see that's a theme for me these days, and you do it by email, someone could say to you, that's not a validly binding contract. It wasn't presented at a board meeting and approved and resolved by the board to be entered into. So you need to make sure your corporate governance, crosses your T's, dots your I's, and you do it properly.
Thanks, Patricia. Another question that we had that we haven't covered is, I'll give this one to Jeff. Jeff, who manages staff hired by property management and paid by the condo corp?
So that's a bit of a tricky question. If they're paid by the condo corporation, they're likely hired by the condo corporation, and property management is assisted in that role. That direct relationship where the condo is the employer, they have some responsibilities. Usually there's a bit of a hybrid approach of overseeing that staff. The property manager, especially if there's a site manager at the property for larger properties, is going to be overseeing the day-to-day things, but often directors may live in the building and are overseeing those tasks as well. So it's likely going to be a hybrid approach.
All right, thanks. Blair, here's a question for you. How does the board of directors or condo stakeholders enforce financial integrity with regard to actuals coming under budget? For example, reported actuals from previous years appear to be suspiciously rounded. What happens to economic leakages resulting from budget surplus in the face of trending year-over-year increases in monthly fees?
Well, I think that's like 3 questions in there.
We're limited on time, so maybe pick one of them to answer one part of it.
Well, the first part, I sort of did cover in the presentation, like the board of directors, really their oversight should be, when we're talking about the monthly financials, they should be coming monthly, and they should be coming on a timely basis. There's no point in looking at a June financial statement in December, right? And I'm talking about the internal financial statements. So that they should have that income statement where it's showing, here's the budget to date and here's where we are. That way, if they're looking at it on a timely basis, they can turn around and act on, things that are getting close to budget, going over budget. And just another thing, just quickly on that, the budgets, they are a budget, but sometimes there's things that come up that, you have to go over budget on one line. So then their prerogative is, or I guess their priority, or the other strategy they can do is see if they can, cut down on another expense or delay another expense if that's necessary.
Okay, thank you. And there's a couple questions that deal with records and not getting records from property management or the condo corp. At the end of the day, the simple answer to what do you do is you request the records with using the appropriate form that you can get from the CAO website. You make the request. If you don't get the response and the board does not follow the steps that the legislation has set out, you file a CAT application and take the matter to CAT. And at CAT, there are 3 steps. You have a negotiation phase, a mediation phase, and then a decision-making phase. And so that's how you deal with not getting records that you think you're entitled to. All right, so we've kind of come to the end of our time. We're already over time. But before we go, I want to once again thank our sponsors. You see their logos there up on the screen. Elia Associates, Aegis, Integrity Property Management, Nordic Windows and Doors, Select Path Insurance. If you want to find out any more information about our sponsors, please click on their logos on our website, either on the landing page at the very bottom or on the event page. Don't forget that we are always planning future webinars. So if you have a topic suggestion or a speaker suggestion for an upcoming webinar, please send an email to admin@ccihuronia.com with your suggestions. If you are not on our mailing list, where you'll find out about everything that's happening at CCI Huronia, and you want to get on our mailing list, just send an email once again to admin@ccihuronia.com. Be asked to be put on our mailing list. We'll be happy to do so. And don't forget that today's webinar is being recorded. So if you want to watch it at a later date, you can get it at our website, or you can go to our YouTube channel, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give the video a thumbs up, a like, and don't forget to hit the bell so that you know when we drop another video. So that takes us to the end of today's webinar. We hope that you found it very informative and that we were able to answer your questions. Thank you to all of our speakers who are also our board of directors. And until next time, I'm Sonja Hodis, and we hope to see you at one of our upcoming events. Have a good evening, everyone.